Hi there, I'm the Macabre, and I'm here to assist you today. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel before you watch it, since I know you use it to fall asleep. What time are you viewing right now, and where are you from? The headlights flashed over and over again, then went out completely as my car stopped on the side of the desolate road. I realized I was in trouble. What I didn't know was that my real nightmare was about to begin. I leaned my forehead on the steering wheel, taking a deep breath to calm my racing heart. The clock on the dashboard was flashing at 11:47 p.m., its red numbers reminding me of what late and how lonely I was. I fumbled for my phone, praying for at least one signal bar. Nothing. Come on, mutter. But the car passed by without even braking, leaving me in a cloud of dust and disappointment. I hugged myself suddenly, aware of how exposed the road was. It stretched endlessly in both directions, bordered by a dense forest. The only sounds were the singing of the crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves. Another pair of headlights appeared, this time from the opposite direction. As they approached, I made out the silhouette of a large truck. It was going at a strangely slow speed, almost cautiously. My heart jumped. Surely a truck driver would stop to help a stranded motorist. But the truck crawled past without its brake lights coming on. I saw it disappear into the distance and not forming in my stomach. Something about the way it had slowed down made me feel watched. I shook off the feeling, scolding myself for being paranoid. I lifted the hood of my car. Despite my little knowledge of engines, I investigated the network of pipes and cables in the hopes of seeing a clear indication of the issue. I looked up at the sound of an engine. It was the same vehicle. Again, this time from behind me. He slowed down as he approached, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The truck passed by again, continuing its way down the road at that same eerily slow pace. I slammed the hood shut and practically jumped back into my car. Securing the doors, my hands trembled as I tried to start the car again. The engine again. He left and coughed, but didn't start. Please, I whispered, please start. The headlights reappeared in my rearview mirror. The truck was back this time. It stopped on the shoulder behind me with the engine running. I remained frozen with my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I watched the driver's door open. In my side mirror, a man came down. He was tall and burly, wearing a cam cap and flannel shirt. He approached my car with slow, deliberate steps. Now I could see his weathered face without a smile. There was something in his eyes that made my skin stand on end. He touched my window and I almost jumped in fright. You need help, miss? His voice was hoarse with an accent I couldn't identify. I rolled down the window just a little, enough to answer. No thanks, someone is coming to help me. The lie came out of my mouth before I could stop it. The man tilted his head, a small smile peeking out of the corners of his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now we both know that's not true, he said calmly. There's no sign around here. For miles my heart was beating so hard I was sure I could hear him. I'm really fine. My husband will come to pick me up at any moment. The man's smile widened, revealing yellowish teeth. Curious, murmured. I didn't see anyone else stranded when I passed before, and I've walked this stretch 3 times. The ice ran through my veins. I had just admitted that he had been circling around watching me. This was not a good Samaritan. Oh no, he was a predator, and I was his prey. I cleared my throat, trying to make my voice sound firm. Look, I thank him for his concern, but I'm fine. He can go. Man leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging up the glass. Why doesn't it come out? Baby, I got some tools in my truck. We can fix this at one point. I shook my head frantically. No, it's not right. I'd rather stay in the car. His expression darkened. I'm trying to help. The girl. Don't make it hard. Suddenly his hand moved to the door handle. Panic broke out in my chest. I lunged for the safety, but he was quicker. The door slammed open and his hand closed around my arm, dragging me out of the car. I screamed. My voice echoed in the empty night, mouth with a rough, calloused hand, stifling my screams. Shut up, he growled, dragging me towards his truck. You're coming with me, whether you like it or not. I fought with everything I had, kicking and scratching. My nails dug into his face, scratching his skin, cursed, and loosened his grip just enough for him to free me. I ran, but not towards the road. I ran into the woods, branches whipping my face as I drifted into the darkness behind me. The man's furious screams urging me to keep running. I had no plan or direction, only the instinct to flee. I heard him chasing me, the rustling of dry leaves under his weight. Every time closer, my lungs burned. My legs felt like lead, but fear forced me to follow. Suddenly the ground disappeared under my feet. I rolled down a steep slope, hitting myself against rocks and roots, until finally I stopped at the foot of a small ravine. For a moment I was stunned, With no air in my lungs, the sound of footsteps sliding through the earth brought me back to reality. I sat up as I could, ignoring the pain that radiated all over my body. Was in a kind of ravine with a stream flowing in the center. I desperately looked for a hiding place there. A fallen tree with its roots raised formed a small hollow space. I crawled inside, making myself as small as possible. The man's breath approached. I could see his boots through a hole in the roots, just a few inches from me. Go out, go wherever I went. You're crooning. His mocking and scary tone. You're just making it worse. Darling, I held my breath. He circled around the area, kicking branches and muttering under his breath. Every second felt like an eternity. He finally let out a frustrated growl, and he walked away. I waited seconds, minutes, hours. Maybe I didn't dare to move until the first ray of sunlight filtered through the trees. I slid. There was no sign of the man. I climbed with difficulty the slope, my muscles screaming in protest. When I got to the top, I looked for direction. I had to get back on the road. Get out of there. The way back felt eternal. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every sound a danger. But finally the trees opened and I saw the road. I almost cried with relief. My car was still there with the driver's door open, but the man's truck was gone. I approached cautiously, waiting for him to jump out of the trees. Nothing. Slide, my whole body trembling, and there in the passenger seat was my phone. I took it with trembling hands. The screen lit up. There was a signal with trembling fingers. I dialed 911 while waiting for the operator to answer. I noticed something on the windshield, a folded paper tucked under the windshield wiper with an upset stomach. I took it and unfolded it. My blood froze as I saw the words scribbled in a sloppy script. Don't hide forever, darling. We'll see you shortly. I was certain that I would never travel on that route again after providing the operator with my whereabouts. Some paths, once taken, leave scars that never completely go away, and some nightmares don't stop at sunrise. They only wait for the next opportunity to arrive. When I initially heard the scratching on the walls, I thought they were mice, but after watching the surveillance tape that night, I saw that something considerably larger and more dangerous resided in the lack, our mall's very foundation. My name is Carlos, and I've been the night security guard at Oak Ridge for the past 5 years. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and allows me to writing my novels in quiet hours. I know every corner of this place, from the CEO's office on the top floor to the waiters' storage rooms in the basement, or at least that's what I thought. It was Tuesday night, typically the quietest of the week. I had just made my first round of the mall, making sure that all the stores were closed and that no intruders were hiding with the intent to steal after hours. As I settled into my chair inside the security office, a movement on one of the monitors caught my attention. I leaned forward, squinting to get a better look. The black and white image showed the hallway outside the food court, normally deserted at that hour. But there, right at the edge of the frame, I saw something move quickly. It was too fast to distinguish it with clarity, but it seemed too big to be a rat. I frowned and backed up the recording. There it was again, a dark shadow moving with unnatural speed and fluidity. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized it seemed to emerge from a vent in the wall. Grabbed my flashlight and radio. Going out to investigate the mall was eerily quiet. My footsteps echoed on the polished floors as I approached the shopping area. I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from within the walls. Hello, I called, my voice sounding small in the vast space. There's someone there. The scratch stopped abruptly for a moment. There was absolute silence. Then I heard something that made me shudder to the bone, a low, guttural growl like nothing I'd ever heard before. I slowly backed away, my heart pounding. Whatever was there wasn't. I turned around and hurried back to the security office, locking the door behind me. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone to call the police, but when I heard the dial tone, I doubted what I would tell them. I heard strange noises and saw shadows moving on the cameras. I would be taken crazy or drunk at work. I spent the rest of the night glued to the monitors, watching for any sign of the intrusive presence. But other than that sighting, the mall remained calm. The next morning, when the first employees arrived, I felt relief at handing in my shift. I didn't mention what I had seen in the cold light of day. Everything seemed absurd. Maybe it was just my imagination. But the next night it happened again. This time I managed to capture a clearer image of the creature. It moved like a man, but there was something strange about its proportions. Its arms seemed too long. Its movements were too fluid and fast. As the days went by, the sightings became more frequent. I found evidence of its presence of claw marks on the walls, strange dark stains that looked like dried Blood, personal belongings of employees that disappeared without explanation. I tried to report it to my supervisor, but he just laughed. Probably it's a homeless man who found a hiding place, he said indifferently. We will reinforce security and make more rounds. There is nothing to worry about. But I knew it was something else, something worse. I decided to investigate on my own. On my days off, I spent hours in the public library going through old newspapers and city records. What I discovered left me icy. The Oak Ridge Mall was built on the remains of a former asylum. An asylum with a dark history plagued by inhumane experiments and patient abuse had burned down in the 1960s, but rumors had it that not all inmates were accounted for. With that information in mind, I went back to work with a renewed fear. I began to notice things I had ignored before. How certain walls vibrated slightly, as if something was moving inside them. As the temperature suddenly dropped in certain hallways. 2 weeks after my first sighting, I made a decision that night. Armed with a crowbar from the maintenance cellar, I went down to the basement, the place where I had seen the most activity. The air there was thick and stale. My flashlight illuminated full shelves from forgotten supplies and decorations. The sound of scratches was louder down there. As I turned a corner, my light fell on something that made my heart stop. In the far corner of the room, there was a hole in the wall. It seemed as if something had torn it, leaving edges and debris on the floor. And the worst thing was that a trail of dark, sticky fluid was spreading from the hole, with the flashlight shaking in my hand. I approached. The hole was larger than I thought, wide enough for a person to pass through. I bent down to look inside. What I saw left me paralyzed. A pale, haggard face appeared in the darkness. His eyes shone with a natural reflection under the light. I screamed and leaned back, swinging the lever in the air. But the creature had already disappeared, leaving only a high-pitched screech and the echo of hurried footsteps in the tunnels. I ran, returned to the security office, and called the police, not caring if they thought I was crazy. Minutes later they arrived with dogs and high-powered flashlights. What they found was worse than anyone could have imagined under the mall. The tunnels stretched out in an underground labyrinth, and inside that labyrinth lived a community of deformed beings. They were the descendants of the asylum patients. Generations of them living in darkness, isolation, and consanguinity had transformed them into something no longer fully human, pale, with elongated limbs and eyes adapted to the darkness. They had survived in the bowels of the building for decades. The story exploded in the media. The Oak Ridge Mall closed indefinitely, while experts from different disciplines studied the eye. Gave countless interviews relating my experiences to incredulous journalists. My novel based on the events became a bestseller. I never worked as a security guard again. But the nightmares remain. The eyes reflecting the light in the darkness, the face in the hole, the sound of scratches on the walls. The mall was demolished years later. But sometimes I wonder they really found all the inhabitants of the tunnels, or perhaps in some other part of the city, are still hiding in the shadows, waiting for the first sign that something was wrong. It was the mound of earth, barely visible in the undergrowth. As I approached, a pungent smell of decay hit me like a punch in the stomach. At that moment I knew I had found something much more sinister than I ever imagined in my quiet excursion through the world. The mountain is my name is Alex, and I've always been passionate about hiking. There's something about getting lost in nature that helps me clear my mind and put life into perspective. So when I had a few days off from work, I decided to hike a new trail in the Cascade Mountains, one that promised solitude and breathtaking views. The first day was everything I hoped for the trail. It was challenging but rewarding, meandering through dense forests and opening up to panoramas of snowy peaks. I set up my camp that night, feeling at peace and anxious about what the next day would bring. The next morning I dismantled the camp early, wanting to advance more ground. As I went deeper into nature, the trail became less defined. But I didn't worry. I had my GPS and quite a bit of experience navigating difficult terrain. Everything was going well until by the afternoon, when things took an unexpected turn. I had strayed slightly from the main path, following what looked like an animal path in search of a good place to camp. At that moment, I saw a dismal-looking plot of land with faded flowers strewn around it and the earth heaped up in an odd manner. My curiosity overcame my prudence, and I approached with my heart. Then, when I noticed other details, a piece of cloth poking out of the removed earth, what looked like strands of hair, I stepped back suddenly, feeling my stomach churned. It was not a simple formation of earth, it was a tomb, a recent grave, and it was not the only one. Observing the area with new eyes, I distinguished more scattered mounds, some older and covered with e.g. The realization hit me like a bucket of water. Panic took hold of me. I had to get out of there, notify the authorities, but just as I turned to leave, a rustling of branches behind me paralyzed me. I held my breath, sharpening my ears. I told myself that, but deep down I knew it wasn't like that. Moving as stealthily as possible, I slipped me in and settled down when I heard him heavy and deliberate footsteps approaching. "I know you're there," called a calm male voice, almost friendly. "There's no point in hiding. Why don't you come out so we talk?" My muscles tense. My mind was running 1,000 times an hour. I tried to reason with him. Running away. I had no weapons, nothing to defend myself with, except my wits. "Come on," insisted the voice closer. "I promise I won't hurt you. I just want to explain a few things to you." Yes, sure. I'd seen enough true crime shows to know how this ended. I spied from the edge of the rock, trying to see my pursuer. What I saw made my blood rise. He was a tall, stocky man dressed in house clothes and carrying a rifle. My decision was made by itself. I couldn't run faster than a bullet, but maybe I could fool him. I picked up a rock from the ground and threw it as far as I could in the opposite direction. The sound of the stone crashing into the brush had the desired effect. The man turned towards the noise, raising his rifle. "I saw you," screamed, moving in that direction. I didn't think twice. I shot out of hiding and ran in the opposite direction. The man's insults echoed behind me, followed by the sound of his pursuit. I ran like never before in my life, jumping over fallen logs and dodging branches that scratched my face. My legs were burning. My lungs were begging for air. But I couldn't stop. I heard their footsteps approaching. I couldn't go on like this. Then the ground disappeared under my feet. I rolled down the hill, crashing into rocks and roots until I finally stopped at the bottom. The impact took my breath away. A few seconds of silence, then the sound of stones sliding. He was coming behind me, ignoring the pain. I stood up and ran again. The forest here was denser, the vegetation more closed. They slow me down, but I would also do it with it. I don't know how long I ran. Time stopped making sense, but suddenly the trees opened up and I found myself on a road. A real road. Hope. Where there is a road, there are people. I kept running, turning every few seconds, waiting to see him get out of the forest. Afterwards, for what seemed like an eternity, I saw lights of a car approaching. I waved my arms frantically, begging for the vehicle to stop. An old pickup truck pulled up next to me. An old man stuck his head out of the window, his face scarred with worry. "You're okay, girl?" "Please," gasped, barely managing to speak. "There's a man coming after me. I need to go to the police." The old man's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded, unlocking the door. "Get in." We walked away just as I saw a silhouette emerge from the trees. I didn't look back. The rest of the night was a whirlwind of police interrogations and medical checkups. I told them everything. The graves, the chase, the fear of thinking I was going to die. The agents found the site I described. They dug up multiple bodies in different states of decomposition. They told me it was the work of a serial killer active in the area for years. He had never been caught. He vanished into the immensity of the forest, leaving only his trail of death and the nightmares of those who found him and survived. I no longer hike alone. I can't. The forest that used to be my refuge is now a place of danger. Every branch that breaks, every shadow between the trees puts me on alert. But I haven't completely given up on nature. Now I just explore. My name is Daniel, and I've always been a bit of a recluse. But when I think back on that day, when I was on the verge of becoming another victim, I know there is only one reason I'm here to tell it. I didn't give up. The first crack on the wall was so small that I almost missed it, but when something was inside the walls of this old cabin, something alive and moving, and when the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the room, I realized with increasing fear that I was trapped here with whatever lurked inside. So when I inherited the cabin, I saw it as the perfect opportunity to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. I felt exhausted from work, routine. People needed fresh air. I needed tranquility. I remembered my childhood cabin, when I came to visit with my family. I remembered it as a cozy refuge among the trees, with the aroma of my uncle's pipe tobacco wafting in the air. But when I arrived, I realized that the years had not been kind to the structure. The roof was leaky, the boards creaked under my feet, and the windows were covered in dust. Yet something in the cabin comforted me as if it were welcoming me home. The first days were peaceful. I explored the nearby trails. I sat on the porch to read. I enjoyed the silence, interrupted only by the sounds of nature. But in the fourth night I heard it for the first time. A slight scratch like nails scratching the wood. I woke up suddenly with my heart beating in my throat. I held my breath and heard the sound coming from inside the walls. I tried to convince myself that it was a mouse, maybe a squirrel trapped between the beams. But the next night, the scratches were stronger, and moved as if something was running inside the walls of the cabin at dawn. I checked the entire structure for any sign of rodents. Nothing. Not those, no holes, no traces of hair. But on the wall next to my bed I found something that gave me goosebumps. Small marks didn't look like they were made by animal claws. They were long, thin, as if something had been trying to get out that night. I slept with a knife under the pillow, though the sound came back more persistent than before. And this time it was accompanied by a murmur, not words, just a whisper, low, as if someone was muttering just behind the wood. I jumped up, turned on the flashlight, and directed it at the wall. The murmur stopped. The silence that remained was worse, with a dry throat. I approached the wall and leaned my ear against it. Nothing. I let out a trembling sigh and I turned off the flashlight. Then just as I was walking away, I heard it a tap. 3 knuckle-sharp taps, touching the wood from inside. I left the cabin in the middle of the night trembling, feeling watched by something I couldn't see. The next morning I went to the nearby town and mentioned what I had heard. I hoped someone would tell me that they were just vermin, or that the old cabin had noisy pipes, but instead of the waitress at the cafe where I had breakfast stopped cleaning the table and looked at me with a pale face, Frank's cabin asked softly. My great-uncle nodded. Why? The waitress exchanged a glance with the owner of the cafe, a severe-looking old man. He always told himself that that hut was, he said, and laughed nervously. Why did the old man lean over the counter? Because it wasn't built on empty floor. It was built on top of another house, an older house that burned down a long time ago with people inside. My stomach sank. That's just a story. True, the waitress crossed herself. If you keep hearing the noises, she said quietly, don't answer them. Don't provoke them, and if they start calling you by your name, go away. I laughed, but it was forced. I went back to the cabin telling me that it was all village tales, superstitions without, but that night the blows came back stronger, more insistent. I touched the wall feeling stupid. Hello. The silence spread like a thick tide in the room. Then someone knocked back. I screamed and stepped back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The murmur had returned, but this time I could understand it. I said my name. My blood froze. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed an axe that my uncle used to chop wood, and with a panicked roar hit the wall. The wood chipped. I hit again and again, and then something fell from the hole that opened a hand, or what was left, of a grayish threshing floor. Skin stretched over the bones, fingers long and misshapen, as if they'd been scratching the wood for years. The hand moved. I stepped back, panting, and I watched as something else tried to get out of the hole. Sunken eyes, a mouth open in an inhuman smile. I ran. I didn't stop until I got to my car, the accelerator, and I didn't look back. I don't know what that thing was. I don't want to know. I sold the cabin for a ridiculously low price and never came back. Sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment in the city, I hear a little scratch on the wall. God, I hope it's just mice, but I never dare to check it. The NE sign was flashing ominously. When I parked in the rickety parking lot of the Starlight Motel, I had no idea that checking in there would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for years. Sometimes the scariest monsters are not supernatural beings, but the seemingly normal people we cross paths with in everyday life. My name is Sarah, and I've always been a restless soul. I was on a road across the country trying to find myself, to myself, or whatever people say when they don't really know what to do with their life. It was late, I was exhausted, and the Starlight Motel was the first place in miles that seemed to have a room available. The parking lot was almost empty, just a couple of rusty vans, and my sedan covered in dust. When I turned off the engine, I saw a curtain move in the office. Someone had been watching me. When I walked behind the counter, there was a man with hard features and cold eyes as if he had been carved in stone. His nameplate read Earl. I need a room, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Earl looked me up and down with an expression that made me shudder. Only you? He asked in a rough voice, as if I'd swallowed gravel. I nodded, suddenly wishing I wasn't alone. I have a single in the corner, $30, just cash. While counting the bills, I felt his eyes fixed on me. When I looked up, he was smiling at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Enjoy your stay, he said, sliding me the key that hung from a star-shaped plastic keychain. My room was at the far end of the motel, away from the office and the few rooms occupied. When I put the key in the lock, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The inside was exactly what I expected for $3. A sunken bed, an old TV, and a bathroom that I had seen better days. But it was a place to sleep, and that was all I needed. I was about to drop on the bed when I noticed something strange. There was a small hole in the wall at the end of the day. Eye level, partially obscured by a cheap painting of a landscape. I walked over and ran my fingers over it. It seemed pierced on purpose. A shiver ran down my spine. I moved the paint completely over it, telling myself it was just damage caused by some previous guest. Sleep didn't come easily. That night every creak of the old building made me tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had eyes in the dark. Even with the hole covered, at some point I must have fallen asleep, because I woke up suddenly in the early hours of the morning. Something had woken me up, but I wasn't sure what, and then I heard it. A soft scrape coming from the wall. My heart started pounding. I lay motionless in bed, holding my breath. The sound continued. Pause for a few seconds before starting again, and then a line of light appeared on the wall. The painting was moving. I watched, paralyzed with terror, as the paint slowly slid to one side, revealing the hole, and on the other side, an eye must have made some sound, a gasp or a dull choke, because the eye was enlarged by surprise and then disappeared. I heard hurried footsteps moving away. That was enough to make me react. I jumped out of bed, putting on my clothes as quickly as possible and putting my things in my backpack without worrying about order. I had to get out of there. I slammed the door open and almost bumped into someone. It was Earl, standing right outside my room. "All right, miss?" asked in a voice to calm down. I didn't let myself be fooled. "I left," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. Earl's face hardened. "Don't be rushed. It's late." "No, it's sure that a young woman is driving alone at this time." She took a step towards me. She was big, too big, blocking the little light of the parking lot, casting her shadow on me. "Get away from me," I warned, desperately looking for my keys in the backpack. It was then that I saw the metallic flash in her hand, a knife. "I can't let you go," she said with an almost pitiful tone. "You have seen too much." I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just reacted. I took my backpack and stamped it in his face with all my might. He stumbled backwards in surprise, and I ran. I heard him behind me, his heavy footsteps hitting the concrete. I got to my car, and my hands were shaking so much that I almost couldn't get the key in the lock. Just as I opened the door, a hand closed around my shoulder, turning it in fury. "You shouldn't have do that," he growled. I saw the knife rising, and I acted without thinking. I kneeled him between the legs with all my strength. He bent over with a growl of pain, and the knife fell from his hand. I pushed him with all my strength and got into the car, slamming the door shut. The engine roared alive, and I stepped on the accelerator. My tires squeaked as I shot out of the parking lot. In the mirror, I watched Earl slowly sit up, getting smaller as I drove away. I drove for hours, fear still clinging to my chest. I didn't stop until the sun began to peek over the horizon, and I found a gas station full of truck drivers. Called the police, told them the whole hole in the wall, the knife, Earl. The investigation revealed something much worse than I imagined. The Starlight Motel had a story of unsolved disappearances going back years. On the walls found evidence that LL had been spying on guests through holes in the walls. He carefully chose his victims lone travelers, people with no close family. In court, I discovered that he did not work alone. His wife was also involved. It was not known how many lives had been taken. Really testify. I can't stay in motels. I can't stand the vacant signs or the doors lined up in a long, lonely corridor. But I learned to trust my gut. I learned that real monsters don't always have claws or fangs. Sometimes they use dog tags, and they hand you a key with a smile, and the only way to defeat them is to make sure they can never hurt anyone else. Again, the first time I heard the scratches on the walls, I dismissed them like mice. But when I checked with the security cameras that night, I realized we weren't dealing with rodents. Something much bigger and much more sinister lived in the very bones of the Oak Ridge Mall. My name is Carlos, and I've been the night security guard at Oak Ridge for the last 5 years. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and allows me to work on my novels during quiet hours. I know every corner, from the CEO's office on the top floor to the bare supply cabinets in the basement, or so I thought. It was a typically quiet Tuesday night of the week. I had just finished my first round of the mall, making sure all the stores were closed and no resag was trying to hide for a late-night robbery. I settled into my office chair, security, ready to spend the next few hours between the closed-circuit screens and the draft of my novel, when a movement in one of the cameras caught my attention. I leaned forward, squinting my eyes to get a better look at the grainy black-and-white image, showing the hallway outside the food court, normally at this hour. But there, right at the edge of the frame, I saw something moving. It was too fast to distinguish it with clarity, but it seemed too big to be a rat. I frowned and backed up the recording. There it was again, a dark shadow gliding with unnatural speed. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the thing seemed to be coming out of a tree in the wall. Grabbed my flashlight and radio, going out to investigate them all. It was eerily quiet, my footsteps echoing over the floor of. As I approached the food court, I heard a soft but insistent sound scratching coming from inside the walls. Hello, I called, my voice sounding faint in the vast empty space. There is someone there. The sound stopped abruptly for a moment. Everything was in absolute silence, and then I heard something that made my blood freeze, a low, guttural growl like that of an animal. I slowly backed away, my heart beating with whatever it was. It wasn't human. I turned around and went back to the security office as fast as my legs would allow, locked the door and sat in front of the monitors, trying to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I saw it again on one of the cameras in the maintenance hallway. Something was moving through the ceiling, dragging between the cameras. Vents with frightening speed that night. I didn't call the police, who were going to tell them I'd seen shadows and heard strange noises. They'd laugh at me or assume I was drunk at work, so I stayed up watching the cameras, waiting for any other sign of movement, but nothing else happened. The next day I tried to talk to my supervisor about what I'd seen, but he laughed at me. It's probably just a raccoon, he said nonchalantly. It's not the first time someone has snuck through the ducts. Make a report if you want, but don't worry, I didn't believe myself. But I knew it wasn't a raccoon. The following nights the apparitions became more frequent. The cameras caught flashes of something moving in the dark corners of the mall. I found physical evidence of its presence, deep scratches on the walls, traces from a dark, slimy substance that smelled like copper. I finally decided to investigate on my own. I took a metal bar from the maintenance room and made my way to the basement, where the walls vibrated with an invisible presence. That's where I found the truth. A hole in the wall. Not a normal ventilation duct, but a hand-dug tunnel with jagged edges and claw marks, and inside that tunnel eyes bright looking at me. They were not humans or animals, they were something else. I recoiled with panic, gripped by but I stumbled and fell backwards. At that moment the thing came out of the darkness. Its pale and translucent skin hung over a bony and elongated body. Its huge eyes reflected the light of my flashlight with an unnatural glow. I did not hesitate. I jumped up and ran, listening to its growls and the sound of its claws scraping the ground behind me. I reached the security office and locked myself inside, my breath ragged as the thing stood outside, banging on the door with a slow, patient rhythm. Only left when the first lights of dawn began to filter through the windows of the mall. I called the police that morning, but by the time they arrived, the tunnel was gone. The wall was intact, as if it had never been altered. No, there were no signs of the creature, no claw marks, no trail of dark fluid. Officers looked at me like I was crazy. My supervisor gave me a warning for filing false reports. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. That thing was still there. Months went by and the Oak Ridge Mall closed for renovations. I heard rumors that they found underground tunnels during the remodel, that there were things living down there, that no one wanted to talk about it. I never went back to the mall. But sometimes on silent nights I can still hear the scratches on the walls. I can still see those bright eyes stalking me in the dark, and I wonder if they're still there or if they've already found a new place to hide. Maybe in another building, in another city, maybe even behind the walls of your own. The moment I saw the message on Timey's tablet, my blood froze. Remember, Timey, this is our secret. Don't tell your parents or your babysitter. I can't wait to meet you in person. It will be a lot of fun. I'll come to see you very soon, maybe even tonight. At that moment I understood that quiet suburban house had become the scene of a terrifying game of cat and the mouse. My name is Amy, and I've been taking care of Timey for months. The Johnson's son are a lovely family, and the job helps me pay for my college books. This was supposed to be just another night babysitting, but it ended up being the scariest experience of my life. Everything began as normal. I got there at 7 p.m., just before Mr. and Mrs. Johnson left for her date night. Her 8-year-old son, Timey, was excited to show me his most recent Lego construction and was already in his jammies. Mrs. Johnson put on her earrings and said, "Now, Amy," allowing Timey to take the tablet 1 hour before bed. Only her authorized sites and games are accessible to her due to parental restrictions. I had heard this rule a lot before, so I nodded. Rest certain that everything will work out. I wish I had realized my mistake. We had supper together after they went. At 8 p.m., I smiled as I listened to Timey chat eagerly about his school and his classmates. I handed him his tablet so he could play. "Keep in mind," I told him, "just an hour, little friend. Yes, yes, I know, he said, keeping his gaze fixed on the television. At 9 p.m., I took a seat on the sofa and looked at my phone, checking social media and responding to messages. I told him it was time to sleep. Although he grumbled a little, he handed me the tablet without protesting too much. But while I tucked him in, I noticed that he was quieter than usual. Everything was fine. Timmy hesitated for a moment before answering. Amy, it's okay to have secret friends. Something in his tone made me uneasy. What do you mean by secret friends? He shrugged his shoulders without looking at me in the eyes. Just someone I talk to sometimes, but it's a secret. The alarms in my head went off. Timmy, who is that friend? How do you talk to him? But Timmy kept silent. He turned over in bed, covering himself up to his chin. Nothing, forget it. Good night, Amy. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. I should insist more, call his parents. I decided to check the tablet first. Maybe I was just imagining things back in the living room. I unlocked the tablet. Everything seemed normal, the same old children's games and apps, but then I saw an app that didn't recognize the icon. Looked like a simple puzzle game with colored blocks. When I opened it, my stomach churned. No, it was a game. It was a chat, and there in the conversation were the messages that made me shudder. The texts were from someone who called himself Game Master Mike. At first the chat seemed harmless, talking about games and children's things. But as I progressed, the tone changed, and then I saw the message that took my breath away. I'm going to see you tonight. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just an online stalker. This Mike was planning to come here tonight. I grabbed my phone to call the police when a new notification appeared on the tablet screen. It was a message from an unknown number. Hi Amy, Timmy is already asleep, right? Why don't you let me in so we can catch him together? A freezing cold ran through my body. He was outside watching me. I ran to the windows, making sure they were closed. I looked into the darkness of the garden, but I didn't see anything. I still felt exposed, vulnerable. I pulled the curtains, trying to calm my breathing. Another message appeared on my phone. Come on, Amy. Don't be rude. I've come from far away. My heart leaned hard. I ran up the stairs and gently shook Timmy until I woke him up. Timmy whispered, "Let's play a game. It's like hide and seek, but we have to be very, very quiet." Okay. Timmy, half asleep, nodded. I took him to the closet in his parents' room and put aside the hanging clothes. Hide here. Don't come out until I come for you. No matter what. Understood? His eyes reflected fear, but he nodded again. I closed the closet door and left the room. On my way to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find. It felt heavy and clumsy in my hand, but it was better than nothing. Another message lit up the room. I'm growing impatient, Amy. Perhaps I just walked in myself. At that point, I heard a noise coming from the back of the house, the soft sliding of the patio door, and he was inside. I pressed myself against the wall near the kitchen entrance, holding my breath, and heard slow, deliberate footsteps. A male voice murmured in the darkness, "Timmy, it's me, Game Master Mike. I've come to play." His footsteps approached, and before I knew it, a shadow appeared on the kitchen doorway. My body acted before I could react. I raised the knife and swung it with all my strength, and a cry of pain shattered the air. The man stepped back, holding the arm where he had injured me. He was tall, strong, had an untid beard, and unhinged eyes. Nothing about him looked like the amiable friend who had lied to him. Timmy in line was roaring, lunging at me. I tried to dodge him, but he was fast, grabbed my wrist, twisting my arm until the knife fell to the ground. He pushed me against the wall, his hand squeezing my throat. "Where is Timmy?" he growled. The black spots began to cloud my vision. Then, just when I thought it was all over, the police sirens broke the night. The man's grip loosened in surprise, and I jumped at the chance, kneed him in the crotch and pulled away, ran to the front door just as a patrol car stopped in the driveway. "Help is inside," I screamed in seconds. The officers broke into the house in the back. The man tried to escape through the back door, but he didn't get far. The cops subdued him and handcuffed him. His real name was Gerald Hoffman, a predator with a history of crimes against a neighbor who saw a suspicious man loitering around and called 911. His plan was foiled. Timmy was safe, but I never babysat again. The moment I saw the ornate mask, something inside me screamed danger, but surrounded by laughter and the music of the Halloween party, I ignored that feeling. I wish I had listened my instinct, because as the night wore on, I realized that those masks didn't just hide faces. They hid murderous intent. My name is Alex, and I've always loved Halloween. The costumes, the atmosphere, the way reality seems to bend a little on that magical night. So when my friend Jen invited me to an exclusive Halloween party at a millionaire's mansion, I accepted without hesitation. "It's going to be epic," Jen said excitedly over the phone. "This guy doesn't its Katama in expenses, and listen to this. It's a masquerade ball. Everyone has to wear a mask all night. It's not great." It sounded amazing, mysterious. I even spent weeks putting together the perfect costume. A steampunk outfit with a brass and leather mask covering the top of my face on the night of the party. Jen picked me up in her old Corolla as we drove away with gothic spires and gargoyles like straight out of a horror movie. Jack-lanterns lined the steps, casting haunting shadows with their flickering light. "I told you it was epic," Jen smiled, adjusting her feathered mask inside. The party was already at its peak. The lobby was packed with people in elaborate costumes, all wearing masks ranging from simple masks to intricate, full-face creations. Music echoed from hidden speakers and waiters in skeleton makeup. They were circulating with trays of drinks and snacks. "Wow. You murmur that I was organizing this party." Jen shrugged her shoulders. "A friend of a friend. Let's go for a drink." We make our way to the bar, dodging a group of people in animal masks while the bartender prepared our drinks. I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I turned and saw a tall figure with a red cape and a white mask in the shape of a beak like that of a plague doctor was watching me. At least that's what I thought. It was hard to tell with the mask costume. "Creepy. You murmur like that. I think they're part of the staff or something like that. Gives an extra touch to the atmosphere." I didn't nod, but the discomfort persisted as the night went on. I began to notice more figures in red cloaks. They didn't speak, they didn't dance. They just observed. Every time I saw one, my restlessness was about to suggest to Jen that we leave when the music stopped abruptly. He fell silent as a man in an ornate golden mask climbed onto a small stage at one end of the room. "Welcome, distinguished guests," he said in a soft and refined voice. "I hope you are enjoying the evening. But now it's time for the main event." A murmur swept through the crowd. This was not in the invitation. As you may have noticed, the man continued. "Some of our guests are wearing very special masks." He pointed to one of the red cloak figures. "These people have been selected for a very important role in the entertainment tonight." He clapped once, and suddenly the red-masked men were on the move. They rushed into the crowd, grabbing random people. I watched in horror as they dragged the guests struggling towards the exits. "What the hell?" I gasped. Jen next to me. Before I could answer her, I felt a hand holding my arm. I turned and saw one of the red-cloaked figures leaning over me. I didn't scream, trying to break free, but her grip was iron around me. Chaos erupted. People screamed, ran, tried to fight off the masked attackers. But there were too many of them, and they moved with chilling precision, as if they had practiced this over and over again. I lost sight of Jen in the midst of the tumult. The red-cloaked figure dragged me towards a door hidden behind a tapestry. I resisted with all my might, but it was useless. As we approached the door, the voice of the man in the golden mask resounded again with an almost amused tone. "Do not be afraid. Think of this as a game, a high-risk game of hide and seek. If you manage to evade our hunters until dawn, they will win their freedom. If not, to say that the consequences will be quite permanent." My blood ran cold as I understood the meaning of his words. This was not a party. It was a hunt, and we were the prey. The figure in the red cloak pushed me through the door. I stumbled and almost fell down a narrow staircase. When I looked back, the door had already slammed shut. I was in some kind of basement dimly lit by flickering torches. Other guests were there too, everyone with the same panic reflected on their faces. Some were crying. Others were banging on the door we had entered. "We have to get out of here," someone whispered in a trembling voice. However, I'm certain that someone else is observing every exit as if responding to the query. A piece of the wall in the backdrop slid in, exposing a shadowy corridor. The voice of the man in the golden mask echoed from hidden speakers. "The hunt begins. Now they have until dawn. Good luck." For an instant, no one moved. Then, as if a spell had been broken, everyone ran into the passageway. I hesitated. It was a trap, but what other choice did I have? I threw myself into the darkness, the sound of gasping breath and hurried footsteps surrounding me. The corridors twisted and forked like a maze. I tried to remember my route, but it was useless. This place was designed to disorient us. After what seemed like hours running, I came to a circular room with several exits in the center. A fountain covered in cobwebs stood in the gloom. There was not only a group of people just as lost and terrified as I was there. A guy in a wolf mask was examining the source. "I think I discovered it," he said when I approached. "This place isn't just a basement, it's a whole network of tunnels and rooms like an underground city." "But why a woman in a butterfly mask?" asked why so much effort before anyone could answer. We heard footsteps in one of the hallways, and with them a sound that chilled our blood, the soft, metallic scraping of a blade, unsheathing, running, someone scattered. We ran. I ran aimlessly. My heart hammered in my ears. Behind me the screams echoed through the tunnels. I wanted to help, but my instinct to survival was pushing me to keep going. I ran until I was out of breath. When I finally stopped, I found myself in a small room with no way out. Panic enveloped me. I looked around for a way out. That's when I saw it, a vent near the ground big enough for someone to get through. I didn't hesitate, ripped off the grill and crawled inside. The metal was frozen against my skin, but it was a small price to pay if it meant escaping the masked killers. I walked forward slowly, holding my breath at every sound. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw light at the end of the conduit. I went out into what looked like a garage full of luxury cars, and there, like a beacon of hope, I saw a door with a sign that said exit. I ran to it, fearing it was closed, but it opened with easily. The cold night air hit my face. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. Only then, panting and trembling, I collapsed on the asphalt. I had escaped, but as police sirens blared in the distance, my mind couldn't stop thinking about those still trapped in the underground labyrinth. How many would see the sunrise? The denouement was a whirlwind of statements to the police and news in the media. The man behind it all, a millionaire recluse with a twisted sense of entertainment, was arrested, but many of his hunters were never caught. They never found Jen, nor many of those who disappeared that night. It was said that the tunnels under the mansion stretched for miles. Some victims would never be recovered. I still have nightmares about that night, with masks hiding in human eyes, with endless runners in the darkness. But what else torments is the guilt. If I had been braver, I could have saved someone. Since then, Halloween, it stopped being fun for me, because now I know that sometimes monsters aren't just people in costumes. Sometimes they're real, and sometimes they win. The first sign that something was wrong was the rattle of my car engine, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine on that desolate stretch of on the road when the vehicle came to a complete stop. I had no idea that this breakdown would be the beginning of a terrifying encounter that would test my will to survive. Sometimes the scariest monsters are not those of our imagination, but those that disguise themselves as good Samaritans. My name is Emily, and I have always prided myself on being independent and decisive, but on that fateful night those qualities would be pushed to the limit. I returned. It was a long drive from a job interview in another state, but I was thrilled with what I thought had been a fruitful encounter. Hours had passed since the sun had fallen, and the roadway was mostly deserted save for the odd truck. Despite my fatigue, I was determined to return home. That's when my old sedan decided I'd had enough. The engine made a horrible squeaking sound, and despite it, for my pleas and pleas, the car shut down completely on the side of the road. I cursed under my breath as I turned the key over and over again on the ignition. Nothing. Not even an attempt to start. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm down. My racing heart was in the middle of nowhere. My phone had no signal. The moonless night seemed to close around me, and beyond the headlights, it was just pitch black. I took a deep breath, opened the hood and got out of the car. I didn't know much about engines, but I hoped it was something simple, something I could solve. However, as soon as I lifted the hood I knew it was useless. The engine was a tangle of wires and tubes that meant nothing to me. I was about to close the hood when I saw some headlights approaching in the distance. Relief ran through me. Body. Maybe they'd stop to help me, or at least let me use their phone. The vehicle, an old pickup truck, slowed down as it approached, pulled up to the side of the road, and a man came down under the light of my headlights. I could see he was middle-aged, with a weathered face and calloused hands, wearing worn jeans and a flannel shirt, looking exactly like a local farmer or rancher. "Car problems?" he asked as he approached. "Yes," I answered, trying to get my voice to give away. My nervousness suddenly went out. "He knows something about engines," he smiled confidently. "I know a couple of things. Let me take a look." I stepped aside while he inspected the engine, making thoughtful sounds. "Well, it seems like the timing belt broke," he finally said. "It's not something we can fix here. I'm afraid my stomach is. I guess I have a cell phone that can lend me mine. It doesn't have a signal." He shook his head. "I'm sorry. I don't believe in those things, but I'll tell you that I can take you to the nearest town. There's a mechanic there who can help you." I doubted every instinct inside me that I shouldn't get in a car with a stranger, and even less in the middle of nowhere. But what choice did I have? I couldn't stay there all night, and who knew when another car would pass by? That would be great. I heard myself say thank you. He smiled, but something in his eyes made a shiver run down my spine. "Happy to help. My name is Tom, by the way," Emily replied, taking my bag from the car while I was driving. Tom was having a light conversation. He asked me where I was from and where I was going. I replied vaguely without wanting to give him too much information, but the more I talked with it made me more uncomfortable. I didn't know why, but something in it put me on alert. We had been driving for about 20 minutes when I realized that something was wrong. We should have arrived in town by now, or at least have seen lights or signs of civilization. But there was only darkness beyond the windows. There is a long way to go for the village?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound casual. Tom looked at me out of the corner of his eye, and this time there was no warmth in her eyes. "Oh, Emily, we're not going to town." Panic got over me. "What do you mean, where are we going?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed the gas pedal. The van picked up speed, devouring the empty road. The terror overcame me. I reached the door handle, but it didn't move. "Child safe, please," I said in a shaky voice. "Let me out. I won't say anything, I swear." Tom laughed, a cold sound that turned my stomach. "Oh, I know. No one ever says anything." The meaning of his words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the first time I'd done this. How many other stranded drivers I had picked up with the promise of help just to not be able to finish the thought. My mind was working at full speed, looking for a way out. I might try to turn the steering wheel, make us crash, but at that speed probably he'd kill us both. I could try to reason with him, appeal to his humanity, but the coldness in his eyes told me that was useless. Then an idea occurred to me. It was risky, potentially fatal, but it was my only chance. I started coughing violently, bending over my seat. "What the hell?" Tom exclaimed, looking at me. With a frown, I kept coughing, letting my breathing become erratic. "I can't breathe, Jade," for the first time. Tom seemed unsure. Enough with that," he said, but there was a hint of worry in his voice. He slumped me in the seat, my gasps getting weaker. He let out a curse. The truck slowed down and pulled over. "Hey," he said, leaning over me, awake. That was my moment. My eyes slammed open, and I hit him in the face with my elbow with all my might. His nose crackled under the impact, and he leaned back with a scream of pain. In his distraction, I ripped the keys from the ignition and forged with the door. He reacted quickly, grabbing me by the hair and pulling me back. I screamed in fury and despair. Turning around, he roared in agony and let go of me. I fell to the ground and ran. I didn't know where, only that I had to get away from him. The lights of a gas station appeared in the distance, a beacon of salvation in the night. I ran with everything I had, feeling his presence behind me. When I finally got there and saw the clerk behind the counter, I could barely say the words, "Please call the police." I survived. Tom number. Now every time I drive down that road, I remind myself that the real key to survival is to listen to your gut. The fog rolled over the lake, thick and impenetrable, as I threw my line into the black water like ink. I expected to find peace and solitude, but instead I found a nightmare floating through the mist. A ghost ship that would turn my quiet night of fishing into a fight for survival against an unspeakable evil. My name is Mike. Fished in these waters since I was a child. Lake Erie may not be the most glamorous of the Great Lakes, but it has always been my sanctuary when life turns too chaotic, too noisy. Just me, my little boat, and the immensity of the water. That night started like any other. I left the dock just as the sun was setting, planning to do some night fishing. The weather forecast mentioned the possibility of fog, but I didn't worry. I knew these waters like the back of my hand. As darkness fell, the fog became denser than there ever was on my sight. I could barely see the bow of my own boat, but I didn't worry. The fish were biting, and the quiet of the mist-covered lake was strangely comforting. It was close to midnight that I heard it for the first time, a low, plaintive sound that resounded through the water. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then it sounded louder again. This time it was a boat horn, but not like any I'd heard before. It sounded old, rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a long time. I strained my eyes in the fog, trying to see something, and then I saw it, a massive silhouette emerging from the mist as the details became clearer. It was a ship, no doubt, but no, one that should be on the lake. I wound was an old steamer of the kind used to transport iron ore in the early 20th century. Its hull was rusty, its deck deserted. My first thought was that this was some kind of historical reenactment. But as the vessel glided silently through the water without noise, there was something about that ship, something out of place, as if I were looking at a picture distorted by the heat. Only that night was cold. Curiosity overcame my growing uneasiness. I started the engine and slowly approached the ship. Mysterious. When I got close enough, I read the name painted on the hull, Edmund Fitzgerald. My blood froze. The Edmund Fitzgerald, it was infamous in these waters. A huge or freighter that sank in a storm on Lake Superior in 1975, taking its 29 crew members with it. What I was seeing was impossible. I was about to turn my boat around and get out of there when I heard it, a voice coming from the deck of the ghost ship. "Help us!" I was crying, weak and desperate. "Please, help us!" Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run away. But what if there really was someone in danger? I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the lump of fear in my throat, guided by a mixture of fear and responsibility. He maneuvered an old rusty staircase hanging from the side. I took a deep breath and began to climb. The metal was frozen under my hands and covered with a slippery layer of seaweed. When I finally reached the deck, the certainty of my mistake fell on me like a stone slab. The deck was empty, but more than that, something in there. Air was wrong. The atmosphere was heavy, laden with an indescribable smell, a rust, algae, and something else somewhat rotten. "Hello," I called, my voice just a whisper in the vast nothingness of the ship. "There is someone here." There was no answer. I took a step forward and almost fell when the ground seemed to move under my feet. It wasn't the swaying of the water. It was as if the very structure of the ship was changing. It was then that I saw the shadows moving on the edges of my vision. Every time I turned my head to look directly at them, they disappeared, but I could feel the invisible eyes staring at me. Panic grew in my chest. To exit the ship, I turned to the ladder, but it was gone. I glanced at the deck's edge under my boots. All I could see was the shadowy ocean, and I knew in silence that I wasn't alone on this ship, and that whatever was there, I didn't want to go. I was momentarily immobilized by panic. Something in the fog was watching me, and I was stuck on the deck of a ladder that should have sunk decades ago. I inhaled deeply and tried to think. I needed to find a different path down. I may be able to locate a lifeboat or another way out. Maybe there would be a radio. So I went back to the sea and made my way to the ship's superstructure, hoping to locate the bridge. Although the thought of calling for help and explaining which ship I was on made my skin crawl, rusty metal creaked under my boots with every step. The air inside the boat was even worse than outside, wet, heavy, with an indescribable stench. I finally found the bridge door was covered of rust, but with a hard push I managed to open it, and then I saw him. A skeleton slumped on the rudder, his uniform shattered and covered in seaweed, as if he had spent decades underwater. But that wasn't the worst thing. The worst was when the skeleton's head rose and looked at me. I snapped back, hitting an instrument panel behind me. A wet, dragging sound made my skin crawl. I turned slowly. A figure stood at the entrance to the bridge. It was a man, or what was left of one. His skin was swollen and pale, as if he'd spent years submerged in the water. His eyes were white and milky, and seaweed clinging to his soaked uniform as he opened his mouth to speak. His voice bubbling as if he were still drowning. "Welcome aboard. We've been waiting for you." My heart hammers in I tried to move, but my body was unresponsive. Behind him more figures appeared in the fog, all with the same swollen skin, the same lifeless eyes. It was the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, or what was left of them, and they wanted me to join them. The captain raised a hand, and a stream of salt water gushed out of his mouth as he spoke. "No one leaves this ship. No one leaves us alone." Suddenly, my body reacted. I grabbed the radio from the bridge and threw it against the window. The glass exploded into 1,000 pieces, and without thinking I jumped through the opening. I fell into the water with an icy impact that left me breathless, but I didn't stop. Kick it with all my strength, swimming towards the surface. When it emerged, the fog and the silence were no longer alone. My boat was still where I had left it, floating in the light. Nothing had happened. I crawled aboard, started the engine, and accelerated without looking back. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of the shore. When I got to the dock, I was shaking so much that I could barely tie up my boat. I ran to the Coast Guard station, babbling about a ghost ship and dead crew members who were still roaming the waters. They exchanged glances and offered me a hot coffee, clearly thinking that I was delirious. But then one of them, an older man, came over and spoke quietly. "You're not the first to say that." I looked up in surprise. "That over the years, we've received reports of a ship that appears in the fog, always on nights like this, and always disappears before we can verify it." Leaned over to me, his eyes serious. "Some say the Edmund Fitzgerald is still looking for its crew lost, and that from time to time finds new members." My blood froze. Since that night I never went out to the lake again after dark, but sometimes on nights of thick fog, when the wind blows from the water, I think I hear something in the distance, the low, plaintive sound of a ship's horn calling new souls to board. The moment I saw the ornate mask, something inside I screamed danger, but surrounded by the laughter and music of the Halloween party, I ignored the hunch. If only I had listened to my gut, because as the night wore on I realized that those masks didn't just hide faces, they also covered up murderous intent. My name is Alex and I've always loved Halloween, the costumes, the atmosphere, the way reality seems to bend a bit on that night. So when my friend Jen invited me to an exclusive Halloween party at a wealthy guy's mansion, I accepted without hesitation. It's going to be epic, Jen told me on the phone. This guy takes it seriously, and listen, this is a masquerade party. Everyone has to wear one all night. It doesn't sound great. It seemed mysterious and intriguing. I spent weeks putting together the perfect costume. A steampunk ensemble with a bronze and leather mask covering the upper half of my face. On the night of the party, Jen stopped by to pick me up in her ramshackle Corolla. As we drove out of town, the houses began to space out, more and more spaced, becoming larger and more luxurious. Eventually we took a long tree-lined path until the mansion appeared before us. Wow, I muttered as the towering Gothic house with towers and gargoyles rose in the darkness. Looks like something out of a horror movie. I told you so. Jens smiled, adjusting his mask with feathers. Come on, this is going to be amazing. The interior of the mansion was packed with people in elaborate costumes, all wearing masks that ranged from simple masks to intricate creations that completely covered their faces. The music vibrated from hidden speakers, and waiters in skull makeup strolled around with trays of cocktails and snacks. This is it. A crazy cure, I exclaimed, looking around me. Right? Jen laughed. Come on, let's go get something to drink. We made our way through a group of people wearing animal masks to the bar while the bartender prepared our drinks. I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned and saw a tall figure wrapped in a red cape, with a white mask with a long beak, like the ones worn by plague doctors. He stood motionless, watching me, or at least that's what I thought, because with the mask it was hard to tell what a disturbing costume. You murmur to several in that same outfit. I think they're part of the staff. It really contributes to the atmosphere. I didn't nod. But the uneasiness didn't disappear as the night progressed. I noticed more of those figures in red cloaks. They didn't speak, they didn't dance, they just watched. Every time I turned, it seemed that one of them was close, motionless between the crowd, was about to suggest to Jen that we leave when the music stopped abruptly. The murmur of the crowd ceased as a man in a golden mask climbed onto a small stage at one end of the hall. "Welcome, honorable guests," he said in a soft, polite voice. "I hope you're enjoying the evening, but now it's time for the main event." A murmur of confusion swept through the room. That wasn't in the room. As you may have observed, the invitation went on to say, "Some of our guests are wearing very special masks." He pointed to one of the hooded figures, indicating that these people had been selected for a significant part in the event. Grabbing random people and dragging them towards the exits, panic broke out. Guests were screaming and trying to escape, but the hooded men were fast and strong. "What the hell did?" Jen gasped next to me. Before I could answer, I felt a hand grab my arm. I turned and saw one of the hooded men holding me tightly. I didn't scream, trying to get away. Around me, people were running, fighting, but the attackers were well organized. It wasn't an impromptu attack. This had been planned. The man in the golden mask spoke again, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Don't be afraid. Think of this as a game, a high-risk hide-and-seek game. If you manage to evade our hunters until dawn, you'll be free. If not, well, let's just say the consequences will be permanent." Horror came over me. It wasn't a party, it was a hunt, and we were. I was pushed through a door hidden behind a tapestry, staggering in an eerie gloom, lights flickering, revealing a stone passageway that branches out. Someone whispered, and then we did. We scattered through the dark tunnels, gasping breaths filling the air. I knew I couldn't trust anyone but myself. As I ran, I realized the magnitude of the place. It wasn't just a basement, it was a labyrinth. A few catacombs hidden under the mansion. I turned a corner and found myself in a circular room with an old dry well in the center. A small group of survivors was already there. "This is crazy," said a man in a wolf mask. "Are getting married to find a way out," whispered a woman in a butterfly mask. But before we could continue arguing, we heard the creepiest sound of the night, a knife crawling against the stone. They were coming for us. The group scattered. I ran, taking a random hallway, not knowing where it was taking me. The screams of those who had been caught echoed in the darkness. Finally I found a small vent near the ground. I crawled through it, feeling the cold metal against my skin. When I came out the other side, I found myself in a garage full of luxury cars, and there, like a miracle, a door with an exit sign. I ran to it. The door wasn't locked. I slammed it open, and the cool night air enveloped me. I kept running until I reached the road. Only then I moved, panting for air. Sirens began to hoot in the distance. The police arrived shortly after the owner of the mansion was arrested, but many of his hunters escaped. They never found Jen or several others missing. The catacombs under the mansion were huge. Some bodies were never recovered. I still have nightmares. I don't enjoy Halloween anymore, because now I know that sometimes monsters aren't just people in costumes. Sometimes they're real and sometimes they win. The first scratch on the wall was so slight that I almost missed it, but when we slipped, a shiver ran down my spine. Something was inside the wall of this old woman. When the sun started to drop and lengthy shadows spread over the room, I became more horrified to think that I was imprisoned inside with a living cabin that was moving. My name is Daniel, and I've always been alone. So when I inherited my great-uncle's cabin in the woods, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to find some peace. I was exhausted from my work in the city, and the idea of spending a few weeks surrounded by nature was too tempting. Lab was just as I remembered it from my childhood, a rustic and modest structure nestled in a clearing miles from any neighbor. When I arrived in my rented car, nostalgia hit me hard. I could imagine my great-uncle, Frank, sitting on the porch, his pipe smoking while laughing in his deep voice. The first days were idyllic. He spent the mornings walking around the forest, marveled by the tranquility. The afternoons were spent reading on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand, and the sound of Los Grillos as a soundtrack was just what I needed until the fourth night. It was then that I heard it for the first time, a slight scratch coming from inside the walls. At first I ignored it. Old cabins like these always had mice or raccoons looking for shelter, but as the night wore on, the sound became more insistent, and it moved from one wall to the other, from one end of the room to the other. Something was in there, something big. In the morning I inspected the walls for signs of any animal. Then I noticed the deep, irregular scratches that were too big to be from a mouse or even a raccoon. I tried to think of a few possible explanations, like the wood expanding with temperature changes, or the scratches already being there and my lack of awareness, but deep down I knew that none of them made sense. The forest, which had felt cozy, now seemed oppressive, and the shadows between the trees seemed too dark. That night the sound returned, but this time it was more than just a scratch. It was a knock, a heavy thump, as if something large was moving inside the walls. I shakily grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at the fireplace wall where the sound was coming from. "Hello," I said, instantly feeling foolish. The noise ceased. There was complete quiet. Then the wall reverberated with a deep, guttural snarl. As my heart pounded in my chest, I sprang back. That wasn't a raccoon. I spent the rest of the night on the couch because I was too scared to sleep when the sun came up. I drove to the closest town and stopped at a small restaurant where the waitress, an older woman named Betty, looked at me curiously when she saw that I had pale skin and dark circles under my eyes. "You're fine, darling, but you seem to have seen a ghost," she said, and I swallowed hard before sitting at the bar. "It's a ghost," I whispered, "but there's something in my great-uncle's cabin, something on the walls." I nodded. "You know my great-uncle. Everyone in this town knew Frank, and we all know that cabin," she said, and I shivered. "What does that always mean?" she continued. "It has been said that something lives in the walls since before Frank purchased it. It has been there for a very long time, and a knot of ice formed in my stomach. I'm not sure what it is," but Betty shook her head. "Some people think it's a trapped spirit, while others think it's something older that hibernates and occasionally awakens." Betty added, "If you heard something, then she woke up, and I felt nauseous, but Frank never brought up any of it since he didn't believe in superstitions." Why should Betty give me a serious look? I would gather my belongings and go if I were you. There are certain things that are best left undisturbed. I should have paid attention to her, but instead of fleeing, I returned to the cabin feeling both scared and inquisitive. I purchased an axe and other equipment from the local hardware shop, and I was considering removing anything that could be within the walls. When the sun began to set, I stood in front of the fireplace with the axe in hand. The scratch began again. This time I did not wait. I lifted the axe and stuck it in the wall. The sound stopped for a moment. Everything was in a sepulchral silence, and then the wall exploded. Wooden pills flew. They flew in all directions. As something emerged from the crack, it was large, covered with dark fur, and scratched. Its eyes shone with an inhuman glow. It was not an animal. It was something ancient, something that should never have been awakened. It gave me a roar that shook me to the bone before it pounced on me. The roar shook me to the bone. The being came out of the wall in a whirlwind of dust and splinters. His form, barely discernible in the gloom, was not human, but neither was he a mere animal. His body was thin but muscular, covered in dark and matted fur. His limbs were long and crooked, ending in sharp claws. But the worst were his eyes, two bright orbs glowing in the darkness. Filled with a primitive hunger, my body reacted before my mind ran. The monster moved after me with an inhuman speed. I tore through the room, tripping over one and falling face first to the floor. I felt its claws grazing my back when I managed to roll out of its reach at the last second. My only chance was to get to the car. I staggered up and ran to the front door. But something hit the wall with such force that the frame splintered and the entrance was blocked by debris. I turned on my heels and I ran to the kitchen, desperately looking for something I could use as a weapon. The monster kept moving me erratically, as if I wasn't completely used to being off the wall. That was my advantage. I saw a knife on the countertop and grabbed it with trembling hands. The being growled and lunged at me in an act of pure instinct. I turned the knife in my hand and stuck it in his arm. The shriek he let out was deafening. He pulled away, shuddering in pain, and I could see how. His dark skin throbbed around the wound as if trying to close himself. He was not immortal. He could be wounded, but he could be stopped. The creature looked at me, now furious. In the blink of an eye he knocked me down, sending me to the ground with a brutal blow. The air escaped from my lungs. I saw his claws rise, and then I heard the crack of the fireplace. My great-uncle always said that the cabin was built with old and dry wood. If he set fire, the whole structure would become a pyre. In a matter of minutes, I didn't think twice. I rolled on the floor until I reached the fireplace, and with all my strength I threw a chair directly on the fire. The flames grew suddenly, devouring the dry wood. The smoke began to fill the cabin. In a matter of seconds the monster howled. But it was not a sound of fury, but of fear. I was afraid of the fire. I threw myself towards the back door and kicked it open, staggering out into the cold of the night. Behind me the being screamed in as the flame spread. I ran until my legs couldn't take it anymore. I ran until the light of the fire was far away in the distance, and there was only the sound of my gasping breath. When I finally stopped, I turned from the hill, watched as the cabin burned like hell. In the darkness of the forest I could hear something roaring inside the flames, but I didn't wait to see if I could get out. I went up to my car with my hands shaking so much that I could barely turn the key. I drove into town. Without looking back, the police found me at dawn, still sitting in my car at the nearest gas station. My story about a creature coming out of the wall was not well received. They said the cabin was old, that the fire was an accident, that the tiredness and smoke made me hallucinate. But Betty, he believed me when he saw me walk into the restaurant that morning. He didn't ask anything. He just poured me a cup of hot coffee and said, "You made the only decision you could." I left town that same afternoon, sold the property for a ridiculously low price, and never came back. But sometimes on silent nights I still hear the sound of claws scratching the wood, as if something was looking for a new wall to hide, like if I hadn't died in the fire. The crackling of a branch breaking under a foot echoed through the woods. We had been planning this getaway for months, studying maps and choosing a route that would take us away from the busiest trails. We set out early on a Friday morning with backpacks loaded and excitement pounding in our chests. The first day was everything we had dreamed of. Challenging hikes among stunning landscapes, views cleared of wooded peaks, and the peace that is only found in the solitude of the forest. When the sun began to set, we found a perfect clearing next to a crystal-clear stream to set up our camp. We lit a campfire, prepared a simple dinner, and sat together enjoying the silence and immensity of the starry sky. "This is perfect," Tom murmured, his face illuminated by the dance of fire. "Only us and nature, without cell phones, no internet, no distractions." I smiled, inhaling the fresh, pure air of the forest. It all seemed magical, but then we heard voices at first. I thought it might be other campers, but there was something in the tone that made my skin crawl. Tom must have felt the same way, because he stood up right away. "Stay here," he whispered, grabbing the flashlight. "I'm going to see what it is." I wanted to protest. Tell him it was better that we went together, or just ignore the noise, but before he could speak, he had already stepped into the darkness. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness. The voices grew louder and then stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Just as he was about to go after him, Tom ran back to camp. His face pale and tense. "To leave," he said, gathering our things hurriedly now. "What did you see?" I asked, feeling anxiety creep in on me. Tom barely looked at me as I put away the supplies in a hurry. Poachers, at least 3, were carrying rifles. Sarah didn't look like the type to ask questions before triggering. Panic ran through me. "Eller, I knew the poach house was a problem in the area, but I never thought we'd run into them." "They saw you?" I asked, helping him pack as fast as we could. Tom denied with your head. "I don't think so. But they are too close. Better not to risk it. There is a ranger station about 10 kilometers to the north. If we walk without stopping, we could arrive before dawn." We put out the campfire, throw the backpacks on our shoulders, and enter the darkness of the forest. The silence was oppressive. Every shadow, it seemed like a hidden danger. We walked as fast as we could without making too much noise. But the terrain was rough, and the Luna barely offered us any light. An hour later we heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps behind us. We had been found. Tom whispered Tom from his hand, and we ran. The bushes and branches were tearing at our clothes and skin. But we didn't stop. Behind us, the poachers were screaming at each other, their voice full of rage. Suddenly the ground disappeared under my feet. Tom and I fell rolling down a steep slope, hitting him. "I think I sprained my ankle," gasped, leaning on Tom. He looked up at his grim face. "We can't run. We have to hide." He helped me limp into a dense area of bushes. We limped inside, covering them with our backpacks and dry leaves. The poachers arrived soon after. "They couldn't have gone very far," one growled. "Ska can't tell anyone we're here." My heart was beating so hard that I thought they might hear him. I held on to Tom's hand, both holding their breath as flashlights swept the area. The men searched for what seemed like hours. Finally, one of them cursed aloud at the wheel. "Worry about this tomorrow. Let's go." We waited until his footsteps faded into the distance. When we finally dared to come out of hiding, the forest was shrouded in an eerie silence. Tom helped me. We have to keep going with a makeshift wooden cane, with Tom moving slowly but not stopping. When the sun began to dye the sky golden hues, we heard them again. The poachers, they were close. We looked around for shelter, and then Tom pointed to a rock formation in the distance. "If we got there, we might be able to see the ranger station." With the last breath of we climbed the rocky hill, and then we saw it in the distance. A thin column of smoke rose through the trees. "It must be the season," I whispered with relief. But our moment of hope was brief. A shout from below warned us that the hunters had seen us. They were approaching. We had no choice, sliding it before, but fear drove us to continue. When we reached the ground, we ran as fast as we could. We made it to the station, even though my legs were burning and my ankle was screaming in agony. When we finally broke through the tree line and saw the station hut, Tom banged frantically on the door, and a ranger came out, shocked by our condition, and he told us what the hell happened to them. "Poachers, Jade and Tom, they are chasing us." The ranger didn't hesitate, and he forced us inside, saying, "Calm down, you are safe here." A few minutes later, the hunters arrived, but they tried to enter, but they stopped in secco when they heard the armed ranger. The men tried to escape, but it was too late, and they caught them all. They took us to a hospital, where they checked our cuts and bruises and treated my ankle. We never completed our camping trip, but after that night, we discovered the true danger. In nature, it's not always wild animals or unpredictable weather. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are humans. We're still hiking, but now we never stray from the known routes, and every time we hear an unexpected creak in the forest, we make sure we're prepared. Because in nature, the line between adventure and survival can be as thin as a branch breaking in the night. The light, the golden of the sunset, painted the forest with warm tones, but a shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. As I looked through the viewfinder of my camera, I saw something that should not be there. A pair of bright eyes watching me from the shadows. At that moment I knew that I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey, and what was stalking me was not an animal that I could understand. It was another. My name is Jack, and I'm a wildlife photographer. I've spent years tracking and photographing some of the most elusive creatures on the planet, from snow leopards in the Himalayas to jaguars in the Amazon rainforest. I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for what I found in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I'd been following rumors, Stories told by local tribes about a creature that walked on two legs, but I was covered in hair with eyes that glowed in the dark. Most considered it a myth, but if there is something that has caught on in my career, it is that all legends have a grain of truth. For days, I set traps with cameras and vigil areas where I found strange footprints, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary until the fifth day. The sun was setting and I was in a platform high up in a tree waiting, the light fading quickly, and I wondered if I should pack up and go back to camp, and then I heard it, a low, guttural growl too deep to be a bear. A shiver ran down my spine. My hand went straight to the camera and I focused in the direction of the sound, and there it was. Bright eyes staring at me from the edge of the forest. My photographer's instinct overcame my fear and shot a series of photos. The camera shutter rang loudly in the silence of the forest, and then the eyes disappeared. I dropped the camera and looked around frantically. The forest was silent, too quiet, as if everything around me was holding its breath. Suddenly a branch creaked behind me. I turned so fast that I almost fell off the platform, but there was nothing to do. I could see. Fear took hold of me. It was time to leave quickly. I picked up my gear and descended from the tree. The forest felt different. The usual sounds of nature were absent. The air was heavy, charged with a sense of being watched. I moved as quietly as possible toward my camp, but something was following me. I could hear it, the rustling of branches, heavy footsteps, every time I stopped. The sound was also I stopped every time I moved forward. I heard him again. I wasn't alone. I tried to stay calm. I just had to get to camp. But just as I was about to go out into a clearing, I saw him just a few feet away. A tall silhouette covered in thick, dark fur, two bright eyes fixed on me. He was bigger than any man, with a presence that emanated power and danger. I didn't think. I ran. I ran without looking back, the heart beating in my chest like a war drum. The forest seemed to close in around me. Every tree and bush turned into an obstacle as I sped my way behind me. I heard it move. It didn't run with the clumsiness of a big animal. It glided silently when I wanted to make it loud. When I wanted it to know it was still there, it was playing with me. The camp wasn't far away. I had to get to my tent, where I had a powerful flashlight, a flare, and my survival knife. But the 5 on the way back, I didn't give birth myself. The forest had become a labyrinth. The darkness between the suns I seemed thicker, heavier, as if something older than the forest itself enveloped me in its territory. My feet stumbled over a root and I fell to my knees. My camera hitting the ground and rolling a few meters. The sound of heavy breathing came from the shadows. I looked around, trying to see through the blackness. Then a silhouette emerged. It was huge, taller than any man, with long, muscular arms ending in hands with fingers too long. His eyes shone with an inner light, reflecting what little light was left in the forest, and then he smiled, a crooked gesture, almost human but too unnatural. I didn't wait to see what he would do then. I threw myself towards the camera, grabbed it and ran. The camp was close. I had to be close. I heard a crack right behind me. I turned my head for a second and saw his arm rising to reach me. I threw myself on the ground at the last moment and rolled on my side. Feeling the wind of his blow graze my back, I stood up as best I could and ran with all my strength. Then between the trees, I saw the dim light of my camp. With one last effort, I jumped into my tent and grabbed the flare from my emergency kit, lit it and threw it towards the creature. A heart-rending scream echoed in the night as the red light illuminated the clearing. For a moment, I could plainly see its face. It was something old and invisible, neither a man nor an animal, and then it vanished into the undergrowth. Instead of waiting to see whether I would return, I snatched up my camera, my bag, and my necessary gear and hurried to my pickup. I continued till the woodland was miles distant. A few days later, I looked at the pictures on my camera. Most of them were grainy, showing just shadows in the woods, but one picture showed his face clearly. I haven't shown it to anybody. There are certain woodland mysteries that should remain hidden. But I know that what I saw was real and that he's still watching me, waiting for the flickering light of the fluorescent above my head to return, buzzing like an angry insect, casting erratic shadows in the empty hallways. It was just another quiet night in the Oak Ridge office building, or so I thought. I had no idea that in a matter of hours I'd be fighting for my life, trapped in a place that always. My name is Carlos, and I've been the night concierge for RRD for 5 years. It's not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills and gives me time to write my novels in the quiet moments. I know every corner of this building, from the CIO's office on the top floor to the supply cabinets in the basement. But that night, even my knowledge of the place wasn't enough to staying safe. I arrived at my shift at 10 p.m., just as the last office workers were leaving. I nodded my head Marjorie from accounting as I walked out with a pile of files under my arm. "Another long night?" I asked, holding the door for her. "You know how it is in tax season," she sighed. "See you tomorrow." If only I had known that might have been the last time we spoke, I went upstairs to the highest floor and started my routine. Vacuuming carpets, emptying trash cans, cleaning desks, monotonous work, just enough to let my mind wander as I planned the plot of my next story. Then I noticed something strange. The elevator gauge showed that it had stopped on the 13th floor. Orage only has 12 floors. I always assumed they just omitted the number 13 out of superstition, like in many tall buildings. But there it was, lit up 13th floor. The air became denser in my lungs. I couldn't ignore it. I had to see what was going on. I took the stairs to the 12th floor and looked around. Everything seemed normal. But then I noticed a thin line on the wall where there shouldn't be any. My heart started beating faster. I gently pushed the wall. A dark corridor opened up, stretched out before me with stale air, as if no one had breathed there for years, and yet there was light coming in. I slowly walked past dusty old filing cabinets and desks with computers from another era. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Steps. Someone was approaching. I crouched down behind a desk just as two men in dark suits passed by, immersed in a conversation. "The almost complete project," one of them said. "Soon we'll be able to control them all, and the test subjects, they will be eliminated. We can't leave loose ends." My pulse was hitting my temples. What was this? I waited until his footsteps faded before I came out of hiding. I needed proof. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. It was then that I saw him through a window in one of the doors. There was a room full of people sitting at desks, staring at the computer screens, moving in unison as if not. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't know what they were doing, but whatever it wasn't natural at the time. A deafening alarm filled the air. "Intruder alarm. Blocked. Initiated." My stomach sank. I ran to the secret exit, but it had closed. I was trapped. The footsteps came back faster. This time I threw myself into a supply closet just as a group of security guards burst into the room. "Find the intruder. He can't get out with that information." My breathing was shallow. They knew I was here. I tried to think how to escape the elevator, and the stairs were blocked. But then I remembered the old freight elevator. If the forklift shaft still existed, I could climb up to the basement. I waited for the guards to walk away and slide down. A cesspool descended to the basement. There was no other option. Just when I was about to go down, a guard screamed behind me, "Hi there." I jumped into the forklift shaft. The descent was hell. My hands were slipping on the wires. The sound of screams and gunshots filled the air. I fell to the basement floor. Everything hurt, but I was alive. I ran. The corridors were dark, but I knew the building well. There was a back exit. The sirens were still sounding. When I saw the door, I threw myself towards her, pushing her with all my might. The cold night air hit my face. But just when I thought I was free, a black car slid in front of me, blocking my way. The doors opened. The men in the suits came out. "Well," one said, smiling, "we can't let this come out." My mind screamed, "Run!" But then a helicopter appeared above us. Reaper lights illuminated the scene. "FBI, drop your guns and get away from the man." The men hesitated, and at that moment the agents descended. It was over. Days later, the building was raided. What they found there was never revealed to the public. The company was dismantled, executives arrested, but many disappeared, including the two men in the suits. I still have nightmares, sometimes in an office building. I swear to see an elevator stop in a floor that shouldn't exist, or an employee at a computer moving the mouse too synchronously, because I now know that there are secrets in the world that should never be discovered, and that some office jobs can be much more dangerous than we imagined. The wind howled loudly, drowning out the sound of my car's engine shutting down completely. Surrounded by a whirlwind of snow, I realized that I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. What I didn't know was that my desperate search for refuge would lead me straight to the clutches of a madman, and that the cozy cabin I thought was my salvation would become my prison. My name is Claire, and I've always been a far-sighted person, but nothing could have prepared me for that night. I was driving back from a work conference, taking the scenic route through from the mountains. It was supposed to be a leisurely ride, a chance to clear my head before heading back to the madness of the city. The storm came out of nowhere. One moment I was admiring the snow-capped peaks, and the next I could barely see 2M in front of me. I slowed down with white hands from squeezing the steering wheel, trying to keep the car on the road. Then I heard a low thud. The hood of the car shook, coughing before it completely shut down on one side. I had a rock wall On the other, a nosedive into the darkness. I tried to start the engine again, but it was dead. I reached for my phone even though I knew it was useless. No signal, of course. There was no service for miles around. The temperature dropped quickly. I could see my breath fogging up the windshield. Staying in the car would be a death sentence. I had to find shelter. I was grateful I brought my emergency kit as I wrapped myself in a thick jacket and stepped outside. The wind hit me like a wall, pushing me back. Snow sharp as needles whipped my face. I could barely see, but I chose a direction and moved forward, using my arm as a shield against the blizzard. Each step was a struggle. My fingers and feet soon became numb just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore. I saw a dim light in the distance. My heart heaved. Jumped up where there was light. There were people shelter. I kept going with renewed determination. As I got closer, I made out the silhouette of a cabin with smoke coming out of the chimney. I climbed the steps. It is staggering numb. Hello, I screamed. Please, I need help. For a long moment nothing happened. Then I heard movement inside. The door slowly opened, and I found myself face to face with a tall and thin man with a thick beard and eyes that seemed to shine in the light of the lamp. Looked at me, surprised, then worried. "Holy God, miss," he said in a harsh voice, "what are you doing out there in this weather?" Between fast, I almost collapsed the threshold. The heat of the cabin enveloped me, making me shudder as my body tried to adjust. The man helped me to a chair by the fireplace. "Thank you," gasped, shaking violently. "My car broke down. I was trapped." "Calm," he said, placing a blanket over my shoulders. "It's frozen. Let me bring him something warm." As my limbs came back to life, I looked around. The cabin was small but cozy. Though a little messy, there were books and papers scattered everywhere, and the maps on the wall showed weather patterns that I didn't understand. The man came back with a steaming cup. "It's just tea," he said, "but he'll warm it up." I took a sip gratefully. "I'm Claire," I said, still with a trembling voice. "Thank you for helping me. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found her cabin." He smiled but didn't reach her eyes. Jack said he couldn't leave her. "Outside, right?" We talked while he warmed me up. He told me that he was a researcher, studying the weather in the mountains. That explained the maps and the scattered papers. "The storm won't stop until morning," he said, leaning out of the window. "He can stay here tonight." "No, I have a guest room, but the couch is comfortable." I shuddered at the thought of spending the night in a stranger's cabin. "But what other choice did I have?" "That would be very kind of him," I said, trying to look relaxed, if not a nuisance. His smile came back, that time more pronounced. No discomfort at all. As the night wore on, my discomfort grew. There was something strange about Jack, the way he that watched me when I thought I didn't realize, the way it sometimes fell silent, as if it was listening to something I couldn't hear. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid. After all, I had been saved. But when I got up to go to the bathroom, my stomach sank. There was a door ajar in the hallway, and inside I heard a sound. A thud like something or someone. The impulse of curiosity was stronger than fear. I approached and pushed the door carefully. What I saw made my blood freeze. The room was not a workshop or a warehouse. It was a makeshift laboratory. Bottles of unknown substances, strange equipment. But the worst was in the center of the room. A person tied to a table was gagged, his eyes wide with terror, struggling against his, and then, since he was behind me, his hand fell on my shoulder with icy force. "You shouldn't have seen that." I tried to run, but his grip was like an iron claw. He dragged me inside, closing the door behind us. Jack groaned. "This isn't what it looks like," babbling, trying to find a way out. "I wish it was true, but now that you know the truth, you're part of this." I fought with all my might as I strapped myself to a chair, tried to reason with him, but his gaze was filled with fanatical madness. "Storms are not natural," he muttered, arranging a syringe with a dark liquid. "There's something out there in the mountains. I'm trying to stop it, and you'll help." The next few hours were a blur of terror. Jack talked endlessly about his experiment. Injecting him, I managed to loosen my bonds. I took the bottle, more I found it, and smashed it on his head. Jack fell with a grunt. I tied up the other prisoner, and we ran. When we found the road, the sun was already rising. A truck stopped when we saw us, and we were finally safe. Jack was never found, but sometimes when the wind howls outside, I swear I hear his voice muttering about storms, about unfinished experiments, and about how I'm going to help him again, because I'm already part of the moment. I noticed the group of customers who only came during the darkest hours. I knew something was wrong. Their strange behavior and cryptic conversations gave me chills. But I never imagined that my night shift in this 24-hour money would drag me into a world that didn't know existed. A world where the line between human and monster was blurred under the fluorescent glow of the early morning. My name is Sarah, and I've been working the night shift at Mel's Diner for 6 months now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gives me time to work on my art during the dead hours. I was always a night person, so the schedule didn't bother me at first. It was what I expected. Truckers stopping for coffee, drunk needing a gracious meal presents so as not to pass out, and some insomniacs looking for company in the early morning. But then I noticed them. They always came in a group. Always at 2 in the morning, when the dinner was emptiest. 5 in total, 3 men and 2 women. Their ages difficult to pin down, seemed to be in their 30s, but something about them was timeless. They always took the same table, the one in the corner where the light flickered for no apparent reason, and they never ordered food, only black coffee, which they never drank one night, when the place was particularly quiet. I heard them talking. They were whispering, but I managed to hear snippets of the conversation. "Hunger is getting worse," said one of the women, drumming her fingers at the table. "We need another place. This one doesn't work for us anymore," whispered one of the men. "No," after Millbrook added another. A shiver ran down my spine. Hunger, another place. Millbrook had no idea what they were talking about, but it sounded it was then that everyone at the same time turned their heads and looked at me in their eyes. There was something strange about their eyes. They were too bright, too intent on me. I froze after a moment. The man who looked like the leader smiled, revealing teeth that were too white. With my pulse pounding in my ears, I made myself turn aside and kept cleaning the bar. I tried to convince myself that they were just strange customers, perhaps members of some strange cult or something, but after that night they stopped showing up. Mike, a man who worked at the gas station down the street, was a few years younger than me, and he had started coming to the dinner cast every night during his break, asking for a piece of cake and chatting to me. I liked him, and it was a breath of fresh air in the middle of the long hours of the morning, but one night he didn't show up. I tried not to worry, thinking that perhaps he had switched shifts, but when they did arrive, something was different. They looked more alive. Their skins were normally pale. They had a slight blush. Their movements were more fluid, as if they had gained energy. And then I noticed a stain of blood on his neck. One of the men, the skin on my back, the usual coffee bristled. I asked in a tense voice. The man smiled. "Yes, and today we're celebrating. Maybe you'll want to join us." His tone wasn't an invitation. It was an order. I tried not to look at the door, although my body wanted to run. One of them, a dark-haired woman, took my wrist. Her hand was cold as marble. "Come on, Sarah. Don't be shy," he whispered, his eyes shining with something inhuman. Fear settled in my stomach like a stone. I couldn't escape. I couldn't fight. Then I saw the coffee maker. The coffee had been on the hot plate for hours. "I must be going." "It's okay," I said with a forced smile, "but before I can pour myself one last cup of coffee as a human." The man who looked like the leader nodded slowly. "Of course, we are not monsters." Lie with trembling hands, I took the coffee mug, and in one movement I threw it at his face. The effect was immediate. His skin alone, and it burned like melted wax. The scream he let out was not human, but I didn't stay to listen to him. I ran. I got to my car and started it with trembling hands. In the rearview mirror I saw the 5 of them standing in front of the diner, their eyes glowing in the dark. One of them, I smiled. A shiver ran through me from head to toe. I sped without looking back. I didn't stop until I saw the sun rise. I never went back to the diner. I moved to another city. I took a day job and tried to convince myself that it was all a hallucination. However, on some nights when I paint in my tiny apartment, I notice something in the window reflection, a shadow in the street, and eyes glowing in the dark, waiting for me. This is because I now understand that the night is not ours. We are merely visitors, and once you realize that, the night never lets you leave. I became cold at the first odd sign carved on a tree. It was already too late when we discovered we were being led further and farther into the forest. We were the prey in a horrific hunt that began as a peaceful camping excursion. I'm Alex, and I've always liked being outside. I thus didn't think twice when my 3 closest friends, Sar, Jess, and Mike, proposed spending a weekend camping in the Cascade Mountains. 4 months, we had been preparing this trip, looking at maps and selecting a route that would keep us away from visitors. With bags brimming with food and the anticipation of spending a few days away from the countryside, we set off early on a Friday morning. The first day was everything we had hoped for. Challenging hikes, breathtaking views, and an absolute peace that is only found in the wild. The sun began to set. We found a perfect clearing near a creek, We pitched the tents, lit a fire and relaxed, enjoying the sound of the water and the crackling of the firewood. "This is perfect," Mike said, his face lit by fire. "Just us and nature, no cell phones, no internet, no distractions." We all nodded. It was magical, just as we were getting ready to go to sleep. Sarah noticed something in a nearby tree, a symbol carved into the bark. "Have you ever seen something like this?" he asked, focusing on it with his flashlight. We got closer. They were deep interlocking triangles. "Precise. Maybe they are marks of other hikers," Mike suggested. But he didn't sound very convinced. We ignored the feeling of discomfort and went to sleep, but my sleep was restless. I dreamed of shadows moving between the trees, watching us. I woke up before dawn, feeling strange, as if something is standing outside. From my tent, looking at me all night. On my way out, I noticed another symbol. It wasn't the same as the previous one. This one had a circle with an eye in the center, and it wasn't there the night before. "This is weird," Jess muttered when we saw it. We didn't say anything, but we packed faster than usual. There was a sense of urgency in the air as we went down the trail. We found more and more symbols, trees, rocks, even scraped into the dirt, more and more frequent, more and more intricate. It was Sarah who finally said it out loud. "They are guiding us in a direction, and it's not the one we planned." We stopped in dry. We didn't know who or what was doing this, but we were definitely not alone. "We have to turn around," I said. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. We had walked for hours, and in our growing paranoia we had lost track of our original route. Then Mike whispered, "Listen to that." We were silent at first, just the whisper of the wind. Then we heard it. A distant rhythmic sound. Sar drums looked at me with wide eyes. "That comes from the same direction as the symbols." Fear took hold of us. We knew there were two options. Keep going into the unknown, or try to find the way on the way back. A crackling of Rama behind us made the decision for us. We didn't stay to find out what it was. We ran. The branches scratched our faces. The beats in my ears mixed with the louder and louder ears. We ran aimlessly, just running away. But then something even more terrifying happened. The symbols were around us somehow. We had been running in circles. Jess screamed. Then we came to a ravine, just a few 10 meters deep, but at the bottom there were sharp rocks. "Look," Sarah pointed to a fallen log that crossed the ravine. "We have to cross." It was thin, old, and would barely support our weight, but the drums were getting closer and closer. We had no choice. "I go first," I said, feeling the trunk bend under my feet. Halfway through I saw figures emerging from the forest on the other side. Their movements were not exactly human. They were too fluid, too inhuman, and their faces had no features, only shadows where their eyes and mouths should be. "Hurry up," I screamed. Mike started to cross, then Sarah. When Jess put a foot on the trunk, a crack was heard. "It's breaking," she screamed. We jumped to the other side just as the log broke and fell into the abyss, but Jay didn't make it. He was clinging to the edge of the ravine. "Let go," he squealed, his fingers slipping. We rushed to grab it at the last second. We managed to pull it up. There was no time to rest. The figures were surrounding us. Sarah saw a path between the trees. There we ran. Every muscle burned, but fear drove us. Then we came out to a clearing. In the center there was a circle of stones, one carved with the same symbols. The drums reached their highest point. The figures had cornered us. We stood there trembling as they surrounded us. Their shadows lengthened, distorting their shapes. I thought it was the end, but then a helicopter appeared above us, the sound of its engine breaking the silence as a voice echoed through a loudspeaker. "Here, the forest force remain where they are." The figures dissolved into the shadows, faded away as if they had never been there. They found us horrified and trembling. The authorities tried to explain it. Hypothesis, they said, that maybe it was a collective hallucination, that maybe we ate something poisonous, but we know the truth. We never camped again. And when in the city I see a strange X symbol engraved on a wall or a rock, when I hear a distant drum, I know that they are still there, waiting, and that we should never have followed the signs. The headlights blinked once, twice, and then they died completely. My car shut down on the side of the road. I knew I was in trouble, but I didn't realize my real nightmare was about to start. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and took a deep breath to calm my racing heart. The dashboard clock was red, and it was 11:47 at night. I reached for my phone, hoping for at least one bar of signal, but nothing came on, so I prayed for more, but nothing came. A few headlights appeared in the distance, and as they got closer, hope blossomed in my chest. Perhaps they would stop to help me. Maybe they would let me use their phone. but the car sped by without even braking, leaving me in a cloud of dust and disappointment. I hugged myself, suddenly realizing how vulnerable I was. There was the road stretching endlessly in both directions, bordered by a dense forest that swayed in the wind. The only sounds were the song of Los Grillos and rustling leaves. Then another vehicle appeared. The lights were slowly approaching from the opposite side. A truck. My heart jumped. Truckers usually help stranded motorists, true, but this one was going too slow, not like looking to stop and help, but as if he were watching me. I saw him pass by, the reflection of his dark cabin flashing in my eyes, but he never braked, he just kept going slowly. I watched him disappear into the distance, a restlessness settling in my stomach, something about the way he had moved, as if he were spinning. I shook my head. I was being paranoid. I tried to start the car again, but the engine just coughed and died again. I decided to open the hood, although I didn't know anything about engines, but just as I did, the roar of an engine echoed in the distance. The same truck this time came. From behind, it approached slowly, too slowly. An icy chill ran down my spine. I slammed the hood shut and got back into the car, locking the doors. My hands were shaking as I turned the key again. Please, please. The engine didn't even cough this time. The truck stopped right behind me. The engine ran growling like a hungry predator. I looked in the rearview mirror, holding my breath. The driver's door opened. A man came down. He was tall and burly, dressed in a flannel shirt and a trucker's cap. His steps were slow and deliberate as he approached my car. His face was expressionless, but his eyes made me feel like prey. He knocked on the window. I jumped in my seat. "He needs help, miss." His voice was hoarse, with an accent I couldn't identify. I didn't open it. I just rolled the window down a few inches. "No thanks. Help is coming." It was an automatic lie. But he smiled, a small, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. Now we both know that's not true. His tone was soft, almost mocking. "There's no sign here for miles." My blood froze. "I'm fine," I lied again. "My husband will come for me at any moment." His smile widened. His teeth were yellowed. Curious I didn't see anyone else stranded when I passed before. He leaned a little more, his breath fogging the glass. "And I've been here 3 times. My stomach sank. Admitted to having been hanging the road watching me. This wasn't a good Samaritan. This was a hunter." Look, I tried to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate your concern, but seriously, you can go." His expression changed. Something dark. It ran across his face. "The games are over. I'm trying to help you, girl. Don't make this difficult." He moved to the door handle. He didn't throw me into the lock, but he was faster. The door slammed open. Rough hands grabbed my arm and ripped me out of the car. I screamed. The sound was lost in the empty night, covered my mouth with a huge hand, stifling my scream. "Shut up," he growled. "You're going to come with me, whether you like it or not." He dragged me to his truck, kick and scratch with everything I had. My nails sank into his face, feeling the skin open under them. He grunted in pain, and his grip he loosened. I seized the moment and let go. I ran, but not to the road. I ran to the forest. Bushes tore my skin as I stepped into the darkness. The man's cries of anger rang out behind me. I could hear him chasing me. I had no plan. I just knew I couldn't let him catch me. The trees were blurring around me, then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I rolled down the hill, crashing into rocks and branches. When I finally stopped, jade in pain, I was in a kind of ravine. Small streams meandering before, desperately looking for a place to hide. Then I saw it. A fallen tree with exposed roots creating a small cavity. I crawled inside, pressing. "You come on, baby." His voice was a macabre chant. "Don't make this more difficult." Whole body tensed. His boot appeared 100 centimeters from my face. I waited. I prayed. Finally, he walked away. When the dawn filtered his light through the trees, I dared to go out. I staggered back to the road. My car was still there, the truck number, but on my windshield there was a note: "We will see each other again, baby. You can't." Hiding forever. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911, and as I related my location to the operator, I knew one thing for sure. I would never take this road again, because some roads once traveled leave you with eternal scars, and some nightmares never end. They just wait for their next opportunity to strike.